I'm going to talk about integrating with anything, right? Anything. We'll see. So, for those of you who I have not yet met, my name is Rebecca Fitzhugh. So it's a pleasure to be here today with you. I was a delegate once, and then shortly thereafter joined Rubrik and got the email from Steve, and I was like, really? I was like, I did it. So this is my second Cloud Field Day to be presenting, so I'm excited to be here today. So far, what have we seen? We've talked about archive, we talked about AWS, native protection. So I'm going to kind of change the dialogue a little bit, but still kind of building on what we've talked about so far. But what I'm going to start talking about and kind of continue to hint at is managed service providers. Okay? So you've seen from us in previous Cloud Field Days and Tech Field Days where there's a lot of market opportunity when it comes to backup and recovery. Okay? So we're looking at a $50 billion market for data management. When we start talking about managed service providers, it's triple that. You know, I'm not going to stand up here and pretend that data management and Rubrik can solve every single problem facing a managed service provider, but we can surely help. Okay? So there's a lot of opportunity for us when it comes to MSPs, especially when we start talking about the complexity, right? You asked so many great questions, and Ken did a great job of talking about how we're trying to help you hide that complexity, especially when it comes to on-premises plus public cloud, and then even potentially multiple public cloud providers that you are using. And so we have this lovely quote up here, because I like to just make up statistics off the top of my head. So we're saying in the next 2 years, about 90% of organizations are going to have some sort of hybridity built in. So then that brings up a problem, right? Especially if that business is relying on a managed service provider. Because now you have data, say, in the public cloud, you've got data on premises. Where? Like, how do I manage this? What am I going to do? So Chris didn't have any kind of Gartner, so someone had to. So there was your obligatory Gartner quote for the Rubrik presentation. You're welcome. Okay. So when you start thinking about managed service providers and even very large enterprises that are not using MSPs, you have a couple of services that you provide when it comes to data management. These are, in my opinion, like table stakes. If you can't provide these, then what are we even doing here, right? If Rubrik can't provide these, what are we even doing here? So these are obvious. But what we want to do is help you build the next generation of services that you're able to provide internally as an enterprise organization, and something that you're able to provide as an MSP. Okay? So using things like our cloud instantiation, why can't we provide that as a service? Why can't I instantiate a VM in a public cloud? Right now, run it as an instance running in AWS or Azure. Why can't I do cloud archive as a service or cloud application protection as a service? I should absolutely be able to do those things. And that's what we're here to aim to provide you. But all of this is built off of one main thing when you start talking about very large enterprises and MSPs, and that is multi-tenancy. So Rubrik has built in secure multi-tenancy into our product. And this is really neat because you're able to not only create organizations to represent different, businesses or different facets of a business, but you're also able to, when you combine it with our role-based access control, to make this as granular as saying, I log in and I'm a SQL administrator, and now I only see my SQL virtual machines that are being protected, or my SQL physical servers that are being protected within a specific organization. So you're able to get very nitpicky down to the application level of what we're protecting. So when you start looking at this from an MSP, and even again, this can be a very large architecture for an enterprise customer. In this case, MSP, you've got Rubrik running in that MSP. You are able to provide long-term archival, right, or long-term retention, and protect those applications that are hosted as a part of this MSP. You're also able to have, we call it Rubrik Air. You're probably familiar more with Rubrik Edge. This is our virtual appliance option that Chris mentioned earlier. We also have another option called Air. And Air is a specifically built version of Edge that has more disk space for MSPs to use in their remote office and branch office type scenarios. So we can absolutely have a virtual appliance running in our different customer sites. And then, of course, being able to charge back by how much are we replicating back into this data center. And then we can always, of course, sell you another brick. And so you can put a brick in a data center somewhere else. Okay? And the power of our APIs is really what I want to cover Right, so it's kind of setting the stage here. So now I want to talk more about the APIs. So we start thinking about MSPs, we start thinking about large enterprise organizations. Chargeback becomes more important. So you're able to consume various metrics from our Rubrik APIs in order to adequately bill. Right? And a lot of MSPs have used a lovely product called VCloud Director. Who has used VCloud Director in the past? I know you have. All right, Chris, really? Yeah.
Through gritted teeth.
Through gritted teeth. VCloud Director is one of those products that it's like a sibling. Like, I can talk as much smack about VCloud Director as I want, but if you say one bad thing, I don't know. I just very protective of VCloud Director. And I'm not the only one, because it will not die. Right? VMware has tried to kill it, but
like a sibling.
Never say die, right? So it's not gone away. It has not gone away. So we've been around for a few years. We can no longer ignore VCloud Director. Right, so I'm happy to tell you that we are now supporting VCloud Director. Okay, so 8.10 and later. So again, tying this back to very large enterprises, because I've primarily worked with VCloud Director in actually very large enterprises and governmental organizations. But I'd be remiss if we didn't pretend like this didn't exist in MSPs as well, because that's kind of the main use case for VCloud Director. So same thing that you see with all of our other support. It is an auto discovery because we are consuming the VCloud Director APIs in order to discover the VApps and the workloads that you have running. And of course, self-service using their multi-tenancy, and you have multi-tenancy on our end, right? So that way you can still have that same level of granularity. But if you're like, you know what? I'm not on Team VCloud Director. I'm not a Goonie. I love VRA. We've got support for that too. Right, if you're one of those VRA lovers, we absolutely have VRA, VRO support. Shout out Pete Milanese right there. I know he's watching. So he loves VRA, and I'm a VCloud girl. But it all goes back to using RESTful APIs. We can consume others' RESTful APIs. That's how we're protecting VCloud Director, right? But we can also have utilities consume ours. So in a little bit, you're going to see a lovely demo of ServiceNow, right? And that is absolutely ServiceNow consuming our APIs. But first, I want to just quickly highlight my favorite thing ever, VCloud Director. It's never going to die.
Favorite thing ever?
No. Favorite thing ever? I don't know. I'm a little bit biased. I've worked with it since 1.x in 2011 when it first came out. And that was like me really cutting my teeth as an independent contractor. That's something that you're very familiar with at this point. Mm-hmm. So VCloud Director, I love it because it made me a lot of money in 2011, 2012. Okay. I bought a really nice car, so I'm biased. I love it. So I am going to show you a tech preview, right? So you know how that goes with tech previews. So you will see, of course, under virtual machines now, you see the lovely VCloud Director VApps. So if I drill down here, you will see that we now are recognizing these workloads as a VApp because that is a core construct of VCloud Director. Okay, so when I drill into this VApp that I already pre-built, notice that it does show me that it is made up of 2 virtual machines. Now what's nice is if you say, I actually don't want to protect all of these virtual machines that are residing in this VApp, you have the option of excluding components of the VApp. Okay? And then of course our same lovely dots on the calendar to show you. So as of right now, you can do an instant recovery. Right, so we know what that one is. That's the virtual machine gets blown away and we're recovering from backup. Okay, and then you also have the ability to export. So what we're able to do is actually export back in this VApp into VCloud Director and have it running simultaneously alongside the original VApp that was being protected. So when I start hearing that, I have a lot of questions, particularly around networking, because if you've ever used VCloud Director, you know that it is very interesting, maybe very complex, if you will, networking. So I can go ahead and hit export. I can choose whether I want to export the entire VApp or if I want to do a partial, and then what components I want to restore or export. And then notice when I do a partial VApp, I can choose to restore it or export it back into the existing VApp, right? Or of course I can deploy new. So let's go ahead and say full new VApp next. I told you I was worried about where I'm going to restore to, particularly the networking, because of the complexity around VCloud Director. So I will drill down, choose my VCloud Director instance. I will choose my provider. I will choose my organizational VDC. All these sound familiar if you're familiar with VCloud Director. if you're not super familiar with VCloud Director, this is highlighting the complexity right here, the multiple layers that you have to get through just to get where you want to go. So let's say our org VDC, next, and then it takes a second and we see NIC mapping. This becomes important because if I'm going to connect to, say, the same organizational network, and then I might be running into an IP conflict, right? So that can be very worrisome. So I have the ability here to go ahead and delete all the NICs off the VM and have it come in as isolated, or I can choose, when it says advanced, I'm very creative with my naming. I said, because I was preparing for VCloud Director, or I was VCloud Director for Cloud Field Day, so, had to take out my emotions somewhere. And I can drop down, and if I have another org network, I can select that, right? So I'm going to go ahead and actually just cancel out, because for the sake of time, I went ahead and exported it into VCloud Director. Oh, I knew it was going to time out. Come on, VCD, don't fail me now. I just said so many nice things. This is what you get. You compliment.
But this is how you make money.
Yeah, exactly. See how complex it is? I'm a consultant for hire. No. Just kidding, bosses in the back.
Not anymore.
Someone's getting fired today. So notice right here that when I've exported it, it's residing alongside, and I chose the same virtual data center, the same org VDC. I don't have to, right? I can export it elsewhere. But in this case, I wanted to show you side by side. And notice that it is appended with the date timestamp of when I exported it. So that way you have a good point in time reference. Okay. Now, quickly want to show you a few slides. That way I can give my colleague time to show you probably something a little bit more exciting than VCloud Director. Not in my opinion, but in his opinion. So I love it. But everything that we do is powered by RESTful APIs, right? You've heard the story time and time again of how Rubrik is built on and consumes its own APIs. I just showed you an example of how we're consuming VCloud Director APIs. And now I want to turn it over to Marcus so that he can show you how we're consuming Rubrik's APIs via ServiceNow.
So everyone, my name is Marcus Faust. I'm an SE with Rubrik. SE specifically on the DevOps team though. So here at Rubrik, and actually the DevOps team has a name internally and some externally, but we're known as the Rangers here at Rubrik. But a little bit about the Rangers and what we do. So we're pretty much a team of about 12 people, and we're a specialist team that focuses around the API and the automation aspect of Rubrik and the product. We're pretty much here to support both the customers and the partners out there in the field. Any API questions or we need to accomplish these workflows through automation, we're here to help out. Also, as Chris mentioned, as Rebecca mentioned, everything in the product revolves around the API. The interface consumes our API. Everything that you do, every click, is an API call, and these are the calls that you can make yourself. So pretty much, with all these building blocks, there's a lot that's possible. So we're here to demonstrate, kind of the art of the possible, as we like to call it. So we've pre-written several integrations, and as Rebecca mentioned, VRA, VRO was one of them. I'm going to jump into our ServiceNow integration, but we have a lot of other pre-written integrations to get customers and partners started with that. So I'm here to talk about the ServiceNow integration that we've wrote. So as you know, ServiceNow is the IT service management, SaaS-based in the cloud, very popular out there. Over the years, they've expanded into IT operations management and other suites of products, ultimately becoming a platform where third parties can develop apps for. That's exactly what we did. We wrote what they call a scoped application that runs on their platform and framework. And really, the business case, we didn't want to just write it just to demonstrate that we can write it. But really, we wanted to, the business case we wanted to hit on was mainly around self-service and how that can help out enterprises out there, eliminate ticket sprawl, time to resolution, a lot of other business problems that we see out in the field. So some of the workflows that we've written for ServiceNow, and this is one example, but basically this is an example of where customers are provisioning items within ServiceNow already, let's say virtual machines or systems. And then we can come in here and kind of add a protection element to that. So they don't have to open up that ticket after the fact and wait maybe a day to a week to have that somebody assign a backup policy to it or an SLA domain. So pretty much I'll jump into a live demo of what it looks like and kind of how it works, and we'll go from there. Swipe. Yeah, okay.
So before we get into that,
Sure.
a couple slides ago, Rebecca was showing there was a segment on Ansible and Puppet and Chef. So how does that all fit into this, or is that what you're going to go over now?
Yeah, so that's some of our other integrations. We do have integrations with Chef, Puppet, and Ansible, and that's kind of to address a different business case. And we have orchestration, automation, and object enforcement as well is what we like to kind of talk about with those modules. But yeah, this is pretty much separate. We don't really tie into those modules today. Now, in the future, we're talking about kind of incorporating everything together and kind of having them all work together. So.
Gotcha.
So yeah.
Yeah, the point is to demonstrate that regardless of what tooling you're using, as long as it can consume a RESTful API, you can use it with Rubrik. And as an example, right now, some of the members of Marcus's Ranger team are working on building out a Terraform provider for Rubrik. So so we are moving in that direction, and you can do it today. We just don't necessarily have something pre-built for you. We have things that we've built and used internally that are just not publicly available unless we're working on a project with you.
Okay.
Okay, so we are logged into one of our ServiceNow dev instances, and we're loaded the scoped application for Rubrik. Now we do have a dashboard that's part of the application, and really the dashboard is more of an example of the kind of stats that we can pull in with the REST API. This is just an example on how we're pulling in the weekly job summary. We're kind of getting a 96% success rate in the lab with the number of succeeded versus failed jobs. If you look over to the right, we're monitoring SLA membership, and more importantly, we're seeing how many objects are still unprotected out there in the environment versus ones that are protected. And then if they are protected, how does it break down? So it's showing us 278 in gold, 170 in the silver SLA domain, and so on. And maybe we're a service provider and we have a certain cost or price associated to these SLA domains, and we can kind of get an overview of how that's playing out. And then just as another example for historical, we're pulling some IOPS and throughput, but really, we can incorporate, capacity, CPU ingest rate, a lot of different elements into these reports. And so this is something that we like to sit down with customers and partners and help customize to their organizational needs. But as I mentioned, a lot of this was focused around self-service, so I'm going to jump into the service catalog, and we can jump into a couple workflows here. Okay, so in this demonstration, we do have a Rubrik category. Now, typically, you may not have this in your organization, but we have them all wrangled up together in a single category here. And really, the most popular workflow that we get out there, and the most popular request is around file recovery, right? So the service desk is typically overloaded with these file recovery tickets, and maybe some of the users are waiting a day to a week for them to get these files restored. So now, by enabling self-service, they can perform this in minutes, really. Okay, so I'm going to kind of walk through a file recovery through ServiceNow. I'm going to choose my Rubrik cluster here. In the lab, I have a virtual machine that's named SEM Faust Linux, so I'm going to type this in here and select that. And then, of course, as Andrew showed earlier, we're going to recover the host file. So right now, it's a little different. It's making about 3 API calls that's coming from ServiceNow up in the cloud, and that's going down to what they call a mid server that's running in our lab. And this is kind of the secure channel between our private lab and ServiceNow up in the cloud. So once we make the API calls to Rubrik, it sends it back. It's going to look very familiar to the UI. It's because we're making those same API calls as the interfaces. Okay, so we get back our results, and I can drop it down and select, obviously, Etsy hosts out of the results here. And then we can also see, if we scroll down here, we can see all of the snapshots that Etsy host lives in, right? So it's pulling the time of the protection point, the size of the file at the time of protection, whether or not it's been archived off to the cloud. Earlier you may have seen a little cloud icon in the interface. It's really the same key value pair in the API. Okay, so, and also if this list is a little too daunting, like in this case, maybe for the end user, what we can do is the API also tracks the modification time in the file system. And this is something where the API goes a little further than the interface. So if all we care about was whether or not we modified the file in the file system, and maybe we just want to go back to the last known good version, we can kind of flip this list around and rekey it, right? So now we're just looking at the modification times across the protection lifecycle, and we can go back to the last known good version that we know about. Okay, so
How do you, from a permissions perspective, how do you manage that access to in a self-service sort of world?
So today, now with the integration today, it's kind of using a single account, and we're incorporating into the RBAC features of Rubrik inside the feature itself, such that if a certain account in Rubrik only has access to a certain number of items, we're using that same account and the same API calls to only limit that access. Now, in the future, so one of the enhancements coming up in the integration is deeper CMDB integration, right? So anything we pull off of Rubrik is going to be a configuration item, and now the configuration item will inherit the default ServiceNow security permissions in your organization. So if I don't have access to, let's say, SEM Faust Linux as a configuration item, it just won't show up here in the selections. A great question.
Are you looking to go beyond ServiceNow?
In terms of the
Other
ITSM
products,
space, or-
yeah.
Absolutely. So,
Especially when you start talking about CMDB. I mean, there's a lot of data that exists in applications beyond just ServiceNow.
right, and so we're looking at some of the other ITSM products out there in the field to integrate with as well. So like your remedies and your some of the other products out there too. And we kind of take it from we've been seeing ServiceNow in a lot of our customers and partners, and so we really started our focus there because it was kind of the popular SaaS-based model. Okay, so I'm going to choose one of my versions here, and at this point we can either overwrite the original, or in which case I'll leave selected. And then, of course, part of the API is you can override the AD credentials used. So if this was a Windows system, we could specify different credentials. And then at this point, I can either add this to a shopping cart and keep choosing files, or I can check out now. So it kind of gives that end-user shopping cart experience here. So I'm going to click on Order Now. And then at this point, instead of me opening up a ticket and now waiting for it to get assigned, this request just went off to Rubrik. Our cluster is accomplishing that file restore. It'll be done in minutes versus waiting a day to a week to have that done. And then we'll continue shopping here. Okay. So one of the other workflows that I mentioned earlier was provision and protect. Now, let's say the organization's already provisioning items through ServiceNow. Let's say a user can open up a form and fill out, I want a virtual machine with 8 CPUs with X number of memory and so on. But then they're still opening up that ticket to get it protected in the environment. And again, maybe waiting a little bit for that to happen. So how do we combine both of those into one workflow such that they can accomplish everything automatically? Now, in this example, this would typically be your form asking you for the VM name, the number of CPUs, memory, and so on. We're simulating that with a clone script, so I'm just going to type a name for this clone to happen. So we can call this CFD3 2018. I'll choose my Rubrik cluster. And then at this point, this drop-down list is the critical element, right? And this is what we want to get into the organization's existing forms. So let's say it's a lengthy form and they're asking the user, okay, do you want to have this backed up or protected? And then if yes, now this is where the dropdown comes into play. We'll do the API call to get the list of SLA domains from Rubrik, and then we're presenting it back to the user in a dropdown form. Now in this case, I'm going to choose gold, just because I feel like it's a critical virtual machine that we're creating. And then maybe there's a cost associated to gold as well, right? So, and then we'll order this up. Okay, so at this point, we can, from the end user perspective, we can monitor where it is in this process, and then we can jump over here and actually look at what it's doing a little more specifically. And this is the workflow editor in ServiceNow here. So obviously, the first two building blocks are simulation. It's our clone script, right? And these would typically be your 5 to 10, existing workflow elements in the organization for provisioning. But what we can do here is we can add on 5 additional building blocks. And maybe the first one, once it gets created, now we're making the API call to refresh what ServiceNow knows about, or what Rubrik knows about vCenter. We're then going to see if that new VM is part of that list. If not, we have a condition here to loop around and try again. We then have a block here that does some internal logging, but then ultimately the most important piece here is, once everything is in place, we're taking that value that the user selected and then we're making the SLA assignment in Rubrik. So without anybody having to touch the UI, without any tickets being open and a human interacting with that ticket, again, all orchestrated automatically. Okay, so we can come back here. And if I refresh this request, I can kind of see where it's at in the process. And this will take a little bit of time here. But typically in organizations, right, this would be 2 tickets, one to provision, one to protect. Maybe it's a week or 2 of wait time. But really, in this case, we're getting it done in minutes. And then we can move on with our projects.
So I wanted to end on another note, right? So we saw VCloud Director, we saw ServiceNow. These are things that you can go and buy and license and do yourself. But what if you have already built an existing service portal? What if you already have something in-house? Can we integrate with that? And my answer to you is yes. And obviously you subscribe to this attitude. I don't need your pre-built stuff. I got my own. So I'm like, roger that. I can help you with that, because really when we start talking about our APIs, you can do more in the API than you can in our UI. So it's really up to you and your imagination as to what use cases you can come up with and what integrations. So we saw ServiceNow. That's just one specific example of, right, how we can integrate. So I wanted to give a specific customer reference here to end on. So we have a customer that is a very large MSP that has 16 global data centers. And they are using Rubrik. Now, one of the main criteria for them was that we could integrate to their existing service portal. And we were able to do that via our APIs. And the big differentiator was our ability to do that point-in-time recovery at a file level. And so, as an example, this is a screenshot. They were like, Rebecca, you cannot log into our environment and do a live demo. So I said, okay, fine. So I have some screenshots. So this is actually a lovely view of the servers that we are protecting in their existing service portal. And we can go ahead and create an on-demand snapshot, and we can drill in and select a specific virtual machine and say, I want to know more information. So we can see, for example, here's all the snaps that we have taken, all of our protection points, and we can see whether they have succeeded or not, if they're currently in action, and then if we want to, we can deploy new from that or recover from that. So as an example, we know that we have the ability to do like live mount. So we can absolutely deploy a new server from that snapshot, from that point in time. And what will happen whenever you drop down and say, yes, live mount, or in their vernacular, deploy server from snap, you'll get a lovely screen that'll say, here's what it's going to look like. Are you okay with this? And you say, yeah, let's deploy the server. And now you have a new virtual machine provisioned based off of that point in time. Right? So I thought that was pretty neat. I wanted to share that with you. And now, the right? The summary. So yes, I work for vendor. Yes, of course I'm biased towards this product, but I love automation. I love APIs, right? That's the same reason Marcus, Chris, we're all here for a reason. And we don't want you to be bound by us. We want you to be bound by your imagination as to what you can do with our product, okay? That is also probably the most marketing thing I've ever said, so I think I earned my monthly paycheck. But it really is the power of APIs, and I wanted to show you that specific customer, right? Because this is not something that we're making up. This is something that we're actually seeing in the field and very excited about.